welcome to Policing TV for part two of my interview with Superintendent Dominic Wood. Welcome, Dominic.
Thank you. Thanks for having the opportunity again to talk to you, Trevor.
So, Dom, we spoke in the first segment, covering in some detail and the really interesting 22 years you had in UK policing in Sussex. And we paused then because it seemed like a good point, because it's at that point you moved to Australia and into Australian policing in the Western Australia Police Force. Your current job sounds like the best job in the world, as a counter-terrorism and specialist support division. So in this segment, there's two things I'd like to cover. I'm really keen to hear about your career in Australia, some of the things you've done, perhaps some of the differences. And I'd like to finish that, though, with perhaps some advice to anyone who's considering taking your journey, transitioning from UK policing into policing overseas, particularly Australia. So over to you, really. And how did your move to Australia happen? How did that happen, that decision? And perhaps some reflections about your time out there. And I know from your profile, you've done some extraordinary, interesting work in Australia.
Well, it wasn't planned. I was fortunate enough when I was younger to do some travelling, and I've been to Australia. I loved the fact that you can get on a highway in Australia and maybe see a car coming the other direction in about 5 minutes' time. That was always very appealing. I loved the weather, and who doesn't? All we ever talk about when you talk about Australia is the weather, the beaches, the vast expanse, and so we were drawn to it. And of course, I think for our generation, one of the greatest coups for the Australian government was probably the Crocodile Dundee movie, and I think that had a big part of that draw to Australia. And of course, Australia were beating England at everything, which was extremely frustrating. So perhaps there was an element of, if you can't beat them, join them. So although I still do kind of support the English rugby and the English cricket team a little bit more than the Australians, but when it's not the England team playing, I do go for the Australians, just to reassure my colleagues over here. So I think I was always drawn to that idea, but at the time there were many different vocations that Australia was looking for. Teachers, for example, lots of trades, certainly not police officers. But a lot of your listeners would recall that back in 2000 or 2005-06, I think South Australia were looking at bringing police officers across, then Western Australia. And it was at that time Western Australia had a massive mining boom. And Western Australia is pretty much propped up economically because we've got some incredible resource opportunities and lots of mining happening in Western Australia. So especially with the boom in China for building materials. So a lot of opportunities were offered to government workers and particularly police officers to join the mining sector. So people could leave, travel up to the northern part of Western Australia to take a job in mining, which left this gap, this void. So it was a very smart move to look across the world at what other jurisdictions are similar in the policing style, same language, similar model of the Pelian principles of policing. So I recall that South Australia first, then Western Australia reached out, and there was a bit of a recruitment campaign back then. There's been, I think, 2 more since, with the recent one at the moment. I did look at going, and it would have been as a constable. And by then, I could have retired in 8 years' time. So I was an inspector in the UK. So I hummed and hawed, and I didn't take that opportunity. But then there was another inquiry that took place, and a number of recommendations about for our commissioner in Western Australia. The inquiry made a number of recommendations and changes, and one of those was to seek senior officers coming into Western Australia. And I, through a mutual friend of mine, happened to see that they were looking for inspectors to come out to Western Australia, which I thought, well, let's give it a go. And I look back now at that time and I think, gosh, probably the biggest decision I ever made. But I put my application form in. And within a few months' time, I got offered the chance to come out to Australia to be interviewed. And it felt like a journey that I was going on. It didn't feel like it was really going to happen. And then it wasn't that much longer that I got a phone call saying, we'd like you to start. And this is the police station that you're going to be working from as an inspector in Western Australia. And which was the inspector rank here is more like your chief inspector rank in the UK. It sort of jeopardises to your superintendent. So you might have 2 or 3 running a police division, police district. So yeah, it was. I recall, even being at the airport with my wife and 3 young children at the time, thinking, is this the right decision? And I do look back and I think it is probably the biggest decision of my life. But I often look back and I think, there are some times where it's difficult, and I know you referred earlier on about what are the things that people might want to consider when they come out here. But of course, it's a long distance, and it costs a lot of money to fly back to see family and friends. And I think that's always for us was the biggest challenge, that we've got family and aging parents and what have you. So we didn't think about it so much then. However, that our aging family back here were urging us to go. They said, you don't get too many opportunities in life. You only have one life, and so if an opportunity comes around, take it. And my wife was very supportive about that. So off we went, off we trudged. We had a family that put us up, a lovely family, to open up their home. They had no children. And for them to open up their home to 3 little terabytes running around and us 2 that they'd never met before was wonderful. We moved into a rental, and then I started at a police station called Mirrabooka Police Station, which is just to the north of the city of Perth. And that's when I realised what my role would be. I had an idea before, but we'd have a superintendent that runs that Central Metropolitan Perth division or district, and that had about 5 or 6 different police stations, and I was one of the 3 inspectors or chief inspector running more operations. And so great, very welcoming. A lot of people were very intrigued about policing in the UK, and I was a bit of a celebrity at the start. A few subtle changes. I smile because Western Australia back in the 2000 or probably 2005, 2006 when I came, still had, and still to a certain extent has a big connection still with that military background, the commissioned officers, non-commissioned officers. It's still got a very military stance. Some people like it, some people not so much. The graduation ceremonies are still really spectacular. They do it beautifully here with the pipe bands and the mounted section. So there was that part, but there was a bit that I wasn't expecting, and I was very keen to be I was very keen to understand, talk to the officers on the ground, and to get into the police station and see the officers and understand the issues that we all have with paperwork and their prosecution cases and their statement taking and what have you. So we're very keen and the IT systems that they're using, and to meet the sergeant, the shift sergeant or the senior sergeant rank, which we have in Australia, that runs the bigger police stations. And I was very keen to get straight in there. And on my first day that I walked in, and I had the 3 pips up on my shoulder, as I walked in, I heard this almighty, John, stand to attention, and it was stand fast. And everybody, and I think you and I, when we joined early ages in the UK, that kind of thing was probably coming out of that culture of policing, the saluting and the standing to attention and all that sort of thing. But still very in vogue in Western Australia when I was there. So I walked in and everyone stood to attention or sat to attention. It was almost like pieces of paper were flying everywhere. And I almost looked behind me to see if Prince Charles, who he was then, was walking, or maybe Shane Warne, somebody a bit more worthwhile to some of the Australians. But it was a real shock to the system. And so much so that I'm one that wants to talk to the officers, and I know that's the importance of that. And I would go on the road with them, and I genuinely wanted to know what it's like. And I didn't have that opportunity to police as a constable in Western Australia, so I wanted to get on the road. And I laughed with some of my colleagues when they said, "What are you doing going on the road with you? You've done all that stuff." I said, "I know, but I want to know what it's like. I want to understand policing in Western Australia." And I think from some of the junior officers, they were quite impressed, and I thought they were going to name a road after me at one point because I'd gone on the road with them. But I did actually tell the senior sergeant that ran the station that stop it. I don't want to disrupt guys doing their work, and when I'm coming in, because I'm doing this regularly, it's nice to be respected, but and that was me going out on a limb really, because that was not the done thing. And I was challenged by the new superintendent. He called me into his office and he said, "Dom, I've just walked into the police station and not one of them stood to attention." And I said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably my fault." But he was a great bloke. He totally respected what I said, and we got on really well. And he 100%. And things started to, ironically, and I can't say that it had anything to do with me, but that did change not that long after. And like some people like it, some people don't. It was good though, interesting. I had to get used to the weather. The heat in that we arrived sort of, I think, February, which can be pretty hot in Perth, not quite as hot as the top end of Western Australia. And the other things that you have to get used to when you come to Western Australia policing, it's the biggest police jurisdiction in the world by a considerable amount, I would suggest. I think they say the whole of the United Kingdom fits in Western Australia, one police force, one police jurisdiction. I think it's 6 or 7 times. And so I remember asking one of my colleagues, I wanted to travel down to a place called Albany, which is on the southern part of Western Australia. And I recall saying, what's the distance? How long will it take? Or no, what is the distance? Because when we talk about distances in the UK, we normally say it's 40 miles or 250 miles or it's 300 miles. They never talk in that language in Australia. They talk in time because you don't talk about distance. How far is it to so-and-so? It's 6,323 kilometres. They don't say that. They say it's 5 hours, 4.5 hours. Because pretty much when you drive from Perth to Albany, it is 4.5 hours every time you go. If you drive from Manchester to Heathrow, depending on what time you go, it could be 2 hours and 15 minutes, or it could be 6 hours and 30 minutes. So that was really interesting. I stayed very much in uniform when I first arrived. They were keen to look at some aspects around problem-solving policing and PPO management, if you remember, proliferating priority offenders. So I was fortunate enough to get involved in setting that up with some colleagues here. I got involved with I got involved in some interesting jobs in a completely different area that I thought I would be involved with, and one was in the IT department. So we seem to have fewer civilian staff, unsworn staff here. We have more police officers, so that a lot of police officers are very much involved in governance and administration and technology, and so I didn't have any of the experience in managing contracts and project management. But I got the opportunity through Western Australia to do a project management course, to get involved in IT. I was invited to be involved in police media. I managed the police media unit, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Very sad and tragic incidents, but having the opportunity to be the spokesperson, it was quite a humbling experience and quite an honour to represent, sometimes on national television, about an incident or a project or an operation that we're involved with. So I got the opportunity to do that. I was promoted to superintendent, and my first job was in the country, which was we have 8 districts in the metropolitan area. So the equivalent of I guess it could be like a Manchester has. I think it did have 10 or 12 police divisions or districts, and so Perth, as a metropolitan area with a population of, I guess, a little over 2 million, is quite a well-populated, modern, as you'd expect, metropolitan police force. But outside of that, and that area is not large. You drive from the northern to the southern tip of that metropolitan area in about an hour, and then from the ocean or the sea to the hills, that's probably only about a 45-minute drive. So it's quite an elongated coastal metropolitan area. But outside of that, you've got 7 regional districts, and they're the country districts. And the one I was promoted to, which was probably the best job I've ever had, was 3 years as a divisional district superintendent in the Great Southern, they call it. It's a beautiful southern coastal region of Western Australia, and it is spectacular. It's one of the few areas that has the massive trees and along the coast, beautiful beaches, a lot of farmland, but a fascinating, completely different concept of policing. If that's what we call regional policing or rural policing, if you like. It's not really rural, but and even my part is nowhere near rural compared to some of the other areas. But I had 24 police stations. 10 of those police stations only had 2 officers in them. And they're the old-fashioned, if you like, country coppers. You always have 2 of you at least, always on call for whatever incidents happening. Sadly, we get a lot of fatalities on our roads because the road infrastructure is so vast. You certainly can't secure the roads in the way that you can in busier parts like the metropolitan part of Perth or the UK or Europe. But a great experience. And again, building relationships, especially around emergency management preparedness. Down in the Great Southern where I was, one of the biggest threats and something completely alien to me is bushfires. And the Department of Fire and Emergency Services, our fire services, manage those. But volunteers are phenomenal in Australia. So much work is done through volunteers. And building relationships with our local authorities, with our fire and emergency departments, with all of our marine volunteers. We don't have the RNLI in Australia, Western Australia. We have, it's the police that actually coordinates marine search and rescue. But all the boats they're purchased and paid for through government, but they're run by the volunteers, so they all go out and get involved in rescues, and they do some amazing stuff. So you'll have a guy that's a bit like the RNLI, I guess, but they'll go out and do the rescues. We have special. They're called, sorry, not special. That's the Special Air Service. We have the SES over here, and I can't even remember the name of it. I'm going to get told off now. But there are volunteers that go searching and support communities if there's been a storm or tornado or bushfire, and they'll come out and help put tarpaulins out and protect people and help cut trees down. And they're very good at land search and rescue. So we often get quite a lot of people going missing in the bush, in country. And so our SES volunteers don their very bright orange outfits, and off they go, and they're brilliant. They want to help all the time. So we have a lot of volunteers. We have a lot of course, bushfire volunteers. But it's such a vast country that you just can't have the fire services there available to put out the bushfire. So I loved working in the Great Southern. It was a different experience. It's the vastness, when you think about some of the other areas, I would say to my wife and I'd say to the team, I'm going to go out and see some of my colleagues, and I'll see you in 2 days or 3 days' time, because I'd have to go out and drive for 1 day, visit 2 police stations, stay overnight, go and visit another 3 police stations, stay overnight, and come back. So a round trip could take 2 or 3 days. But then if you go to probably the biggest police division or district in the world, and that's they call it the Goldfields, which is out in a place called Kalgoorlie, which some of your listeners will know. But it was the part of the mining boom which brought a lot of Europeans and a lot of people from the eastern states across back in the late, I guess it's probably the 1800s. But that brought a lot of people across because of gold. But that district is immense, and I remember once being invited by the superintendent of that district because they were going to go out and see some of their officers. And so they flew me from Perth to Kalgoorlie. And that was just to get to the police headquarters for that district. Then the whole team of us flew to one remote part, and then we stayed, and I think we stayed overnight twice. So that was a 2-day round trip flying just round just to see your officers, to go and say, "How you guys going? Are there any issues that we need to help you with?" And just doing that administrative governance and checking on things and seeing the staff, having a barbecue and having a bite to eat with them in the evening, but just to fly. And that, to me, that's the biggest aspect here. It's vast. If you have a major crash or a homicide at the top end of Perth, officers are called out. They're put on a commercial jet and they're flown to the northern part of Western Australia. Then they'll have to get on maybe a smaller aircraft. They could get the helicopter. They'll jump in the four-wheel drive and drive for another 6 hours if needs be, just to attend the scene of a crash or scene of a significant incident or homicide. And it's the tyranny of distance. And I remember talking to a friend of mine called Mick, who British officer as well. He was from Thames Valley Police, and he was posted to a town called Eucla, right on the border with South Australia, middle of nowhere. And he loved it. And there wasn't a big community there, but he absolutely adored working out there. But he said it wouldn't be unusual if there was a serious crash on the highway, that one of them will be driving a police car, one of them will be driving the ambulance, and one of them will be driving the fire engine. And it's just a completely different concept. And I laugh when he said that he had to learn how to do some hairdressing because there was no hairdresser at the time, and his wife wanted her hair done a certain way. Now, I would say brave man, but he did the right thing by his partner. So, policing here is it's a fabulous place.
Dom, can I just ask then? Is there a what were the challenges culturally? Now, people who know me knew I grew up in Australia, and so I kind of back in the 70s when I was growing up, there was some differences. But did you find, being a southern UK boy, any great cultural, say, challenges, but differences really?
Oh, look, I think the cultural challenges for me are probably the same cultural challenges you get anywhere. Even when I transferred from Sussex to Manchester, I didn't know policing because I was from the south. I was a southern Jesse, But and I think when we all go across, we all think we all know best, and our experiences are the right way of doing policing. And I think you have to adjust accordingly. So I think you have to pause, and I think you have to. Like I said, I wanted to know what policing was like. I wanted to try to go out and meet officers. I think you have to accept that a lot of officers, probably the ones more junior to you, are going to be really interested. They were, wow, you do that? We should think about doing that here. And maybe some of my more senior colleagues were a little bit, I'm not sure about that. Someone came over here once before, we tried that. That doesn't work. And I think, you know what it's like. We all have our way of doing things, and if someone's going to come in from the outside, no, we don't want to hear what you do it over there. That's a different thing. So I think that's a culture, and I get that, and I understand that, and it can be frustrating. I think there were times where I thought, we don't need to do this. It actually works if you don't do that, or we could do this differently, and there are frustrations, and I think that's a message for a lot of those officers that are considering coming out of it. Don't go with it. It's a different culture. There's some great things that we do over here, and there's some great aspects of policing which are different to other parts of the world. Don't get frustrated. Go with it. Work with the culture that we have here. Work with the tools, the resources, the people that have got the experience in working here. I think metropolitan policing in Perth probably could open up to some different ways of doing business because it is very similar to other parts of modern Western culture. Possibly a very few aspects of policing in the metropolitan area here is probably held back a little bit from the having to do things in the way that we've done them in a very remote part of Australia. And so that might, I think sometimes some parts could be changed. I've had conversations with people saying, well, that wouldn't work here because if you're up in Kununurra, and I think you've been to Kununurra or lived up there, but one of the most remote parts of Western Australia on the border with the Northern Territory. Oh, we couldn't do that because you couldn't do that up there because it's so remote, or we don't have the resources. And I said, yeah, I know we can't do that there, but maybe we could do that here in the central part of metropolitan Perth. So I think sometimes that culture of, well, hold back.
Dom, so
Yes.
sorry to just interrupt then. So I think Western Australia are looking to bring some more UK officers over. I think even South Australia might be. So your journey's been very significant, and you've made the transition from inspector and then transitioned and got promoted in the force and have done some extraordinary work. So if I was a constable and in the UK with a bit of policing experience and I'm looking at that advert, what advice would you give me, either personally from a family or personal perspective, but professionally, about grasping the opportunity to come to Australia to work?
Well, I think, look, I've often said about the biggest issue for us has been as a family is the distance with loved ones. And you can't be selfish about it. You've got to talk to your partner. If you're the one that's making that decision, if you're the one that's taking that role, sometimes it might be a husband and wife or partners that have both been offered jobs, so it's different. But if you're the one that's being offered that job, you have to talk and you have to talk and you have to talk again and again to your partner and to your children and to your parents, and you have to go on that journey with them. You can't be selfish in any way. You can't be starry-eyed that this is paradise. You are going to be doing the same type of work in a different part of the world, and that's it. Don't jump at it because you think it's paradise. You've got to realise that you're still doing the same work, and can you? Because it's pretty much a one-way trip because of the expense. Can you bring your partner, in my case, my wife and children, to the other side of the world forever? I think you've got to look at it that way. This is a for me, it was certainly a one-way trip. So it's a big decision. I always say to people, if I won the lottery tomorrow, and I've often said this, I don't dwell on it too much, but I say, if I win the lottery, where would you live? Would you go back to Sussex, Manchester, London, or would you say here? And before I could finish the sentence, it's here. I've always said that. There are some regrets with, I've lost my parents or my father, and my wife has lost loved ones over in the UK, and it's difficult to be able to get across and be with our loved ones. But that's the one thing that you have to be aware of. I think, but I always say, I always come back to when we did come over here. My wife got a card for me, and I opened this card, and it had a little boy with a stick at a river, and he was reaching for something, and it was a little gold thing going down the stream, and it was saying it was an opportunity. He was reaching for an opportunity, and I think it's always resonated with me that it's an opportunity. I think you'll always have greater regrets if you don't grasp opportunities, because this is the only life we have, and you will never know. And I think you can be. I always think to myself, I would have been a complete grump, and I would have blamed everybody if anything that went wrong in the UK, if I hadn't taken this opportunity, if anything had gone wrong, my whole family, my partner in particular, would have said, my stock answer would have been, well, this wouldn't have happened if we'd gone to Australia. So I do know that it was the right opportunity. I think I always say to people, don't, if your career is flourishing in the UK and you feel that you've got an opportunity to get up through the ranks, and I think you can get promoted more quickly in the UK. If it's career that means so much to you, you do need to think about that, because there's no doubt about it. You will slow. Your career could be slower progressively here. People tend to work through longer here. You retire, especially those people when you and I joined. We retire from the police earlier. You don't here. You can go on into your 60s. So there are those positives and opportunities, but your career doesn't necessarily go. If you're staying till 60, there's no. there's a bit of a phrase in Western Australia, not so much a phrase, but it's very much a cultural thing. Has that officer done his or her time at rank? They like that here. Well, experience is everything, and experience is important. But I think you've got to balance experience with acumen and leadership, and that some people, and you and I have seen them, some people have just got this ability to read something and know it, and highly intelligent and can pick things up and can get promoted very quickly. But it doesn't resonate so much here. So I often say to people that are very career-minded, it's not so much about the career; it's about your lifestyle. Think about your family. It's an incredible lifestyle. The job isn't that much different. It really isn't much different, as you'd expect. Our computer systems, our software systems, some of our processing is different. There's some unusual, quirky things. The culture is slightly different, but family comes first. It's got to be right for you and your whole family, and it is a pretty much a one-way ticket. But it's about that lifestyle. And like I said, if it wasn't for the career, if it wasn't for the money, if I won the lottery tomorrow, I would be buying a second home here. I wouldn't be looking to go back to the UK to live. It is absolutely beautiful. I've taken my youngest son on camping trips into places that it is paradise. Some of that Crocodile Dundee country I talk about. It's some of the places you can visit. They're good drives, and you've got to make sure you've got all the kit. My wife and I have been on, and with my youngest son, a road trip through the middle of Australia, and thank goodness we were just prepared enough. And now my role is emergency preparedness and emergency operations. And I'm telling everybody, when you go out in the bush, make sure you've got your personal beacons, and you've got your spare tyres and your water and everything else. I did just about have that, but we could have come unstuck. We had a couple of punctures, and you think, well, that's fine. We'll just we'll just pump the tyre up. But it's not easy when you're driving through red sand. So it's an adventure. It's a beautiful part of the world. And if you're somebody that believes that you only live once and you like taking opportunities, and your whole family want to come on the journey with you, it's a brilliant adventure. It's a beautiful place to live. Not without its problems. Same thing that we all have: cost of living, fuel prices are going up, but it's not that dissimilar. We've had some interesting times travelling around. We've had the wildlife is interesting. You don't have. I think we talked about the worst thing you might come across is a badger or a deer that you might have to steer around when you're driving through the country lanes of England. But here, we've had when you're driving on some of our highways. Of course, I've hit kangaroos a couple of times. Pretty scary experience. But not only do we have kangaroos that are just meandering across the road, we've got emus, and we've got donkeys, and we've got camels, and we've got, when you go to the top end, and you'll probably remember this, cattle. So it's an interesting experience. But I've loved the adventure. I never thought a few years ago, I'd be riding a motorcycle across Australia with a great bunch of guys. That in itself was an experience, riding a motorcycle and overtaking a road train, which is about as long as the Queen Mary 2. So yeah, when it says long vehicle at the back on a truck here, that's my biggest advice to people. It's a long vehicle.
Dom, you've been on the long journey, not just past the long vehicle as well. So, you've had an extraordinary career, and actually, you're right. I think you just when you were closing, then you were talking about the adventure, and you've certainly been on that personally and professionally. So, listen, I just want to say thank you to you. It's been a thoroughly entertaining hour talking to you. We could have talked for a lot longer because you've crammed a lot into even though it's 40 years plus of policing. So I just want to say thanks. I know you're still with the police out there and still working, so I wish you the best and keep all you and your team safe in what you do. But enjoy the adventure and continue to enjoy it. But for now, Dom, I just want to say a big thank you for joining us, and people are going to find your story fascinating. And I think you've done a good job at promoting the adventure as well. So I'm sure people listening will be very grateful for that. But Dom, thank you very much for your time, and it's really appreciated.
Thank you very much, and I hope it has been helpful to those that are thinking about the similar adventure, and they can always reach out to me and find me. It's easy these days on social media, and hopefully I'll get to listen to your adventure as well, because yours is pretty exciting. Yours is pretty amazing too. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Thanks, Dom. Really appreciate it. Bye for now.